Okay. Constructive starts now. We negate the resolution framework sustainability if the increased spending on public infrastructure can not only mitigate the status quo poverty, but also prevent the future poverty. The judge should vote for Khan's ballot. Contention 1, transportation. Project Partner states that most of the poor population in China lives in rural areas. Subpoint A, e-commerce and tourism. Transportation helps the e-commerce and tourism by lowering the logistic costs. According to Leo 2020, the Jiangxi Expressway Network and the Sichuan Road Network created a total of 2 billion RMB of turnover and 4.8 million tourists with e-commerce, with 80% of townships and 32% of poor villagers getting lifted out of poverty. Subpoint B, rural businesses. Poor transportation also harms the local businesses. IASA shows the township and village enterprises, or the TVEs, are restricted by deficient rural infrastructure and poor transportation. With the increased transportation, as mentioned by Tong, the number of TVEs increased by 10.8 million in 5 years. The average annual income for TVE workers is 12,000 RMB more than the farmer's average annual income. According to American Enterprise Institute, a 1% increase in parent income translates to a 0.3% increase in child income. This income increase allows people to access education and healthcare. TVEs also account for 40% of the total expenditure in rural areas for schools, roads, healthcare services, and pensions for the disabled. Subpoint C, remittances. Transportation provides access to high-income urban jobs for migrant workers. According to Scientific Data 2018, new transportation modes have become the biggest determinant for migration in China. The Journal of Comparative Economics suggests migration increases household income per capita by 8.5% to 13.1%. As Swin 2016 shows, a 1% increase in the access to high-speed rails can lead to a 3.4% increase in income. The migrant workers will further help their hometowns' poverty by sending back remittances saved from their high-income jobs in the cities. Increasing remittances have two impacts here. One, education. Yuva Wellassa University 2019 states that remittances increase the likelihood of rural children being enrolled in school by 43.6%. Two, healthcare. According to JAMS, 75.4% of patients from rural areas have not been hospitalized when necessary. Remittances can help the poor pay for medical care. Contention 2, forestation. The poorest counties in central and western China are suffering from the bad economy caused by the desertification and sandstorms in certain areas. According to World Bank, those regions suffer from the most poverty because of the lack of flat farming space, making forestation the most important production asset available instead. China launched the TSFB project, which has restored 10 million hectares of dry grassland and forests. As Xinhua 2019 states, every 4 million more hectares become protected and 120 billion RMB could be generated, pulling 150 million villagers out of poverty through improved farming and other job opportunities, such as forest rangers or wood manufacturers. More than 500,000 poor people were employed as forest rangers by TSFP. Forestry development contributed to a significant decline in poverty in project areas from 40% in 1998 to 17.5% when the projects closed in 2005. Contention 3, education. Education is crucial to sustainable poverty alleviation. Global Citizenship found an individual's income increases by 10% with every year of education they're provided with. However, according to Project Partner, nearly 3/4 of rural schools were closed in 2015. The number of students enrolled in rural schools fell to 28.9 million, as those students cannot travel for a long distance due to the lack of the transportation. Also, according to An, most rural students drop out from high schools because of the low quality teaching. Simply by paying for these students' tuition cannot help them. Without funding on infrastructures, the poor living and teaching conditions cannot attract young, talented teachers to work for rural students. As stated by China Daily, poor job satisfaction of rural teaching results in high turnover rates of high-quality rural teachers. Thus, we negate today's resolution. Thank you.
Right, so if everyone's ready, our time starts now. One criteria for the judge to determine effectiveness is whoever helps the most people per yuan spent should win today's debate. Contention 1, education. Poor people aren't able to attend schools due to the lack of funding. In 2011, expenditure on education per rural student was 900 yuan less than for the urban cities, according to China News. Only about 40% of rural students even attend high school because of the cost. Many decide to drop out. In underdeveloped rural areas, local governments often have a financial shortage to offer state-subsidized compulsory education, especially post-primary compulsory education. Without state subsidies, impoverished households are unable or unwilling to pay for the necessary education fees for their children. This situation demands for more funding on education welfare, especially in rural areas. According to a study of the World Bank, poverty incidences is greater than 16% if the breadwinner in the household receives less than 6 years of education. It decreases to 7% in the case of 6 to 9 years of education, and further to 2.5% in the case of 9 to 12 years of education. Poverty is almost unlikely for a household with a laborer having received more than 12 years of education. Thus, we're urging to increase spending to ensure 12 years compulsory education. International Food Policy Research Institute have concluded that for every 10,000 RMB investment in education can lift 7 individuals out of poverty. Contention 2, welfare benefits those who are unable to work. Subpoint 8, pensions. The elderly is a huge aging population in China, as the proportion for older people will increase from 11.4% in 2017 to 26.1% in 2050. However, the current pension for old people only covers about 26% of the labor force. Meanwhile, the poverty rate was as high as 22.3% for older people in rural areas. There were more than 18 million poor older people in China in 2011, with over 75% living in rural areas. According to CGTN in 2019, state assets are the best funding resources for them. The total value is somewhere between 60 to 7 trillion yuan, according to the government plans. 10% of them will be transferred to the pension fund, which is enough to cover any pension shortfall among the elderly. Subpoint B, disability rehabilitation. There are at least 83 million people with disabilities in China. Over 40% of them are illiterate. We provide them with disability rehabilitation and further increased their school enrollment rate to 80% and gave 600,000 disabled people vocational welfare training. We also alleviated 7 million of them out of poverty. 5.16 million disabled people in the urban and rural areas were in extreme poverty and are now ensured a basic living. People with disabilities are usually in poverty since they cannot find a sustainable high-income job. They are often neglected by society or undermined by the public and the government, and increased spending in welfare and disability rehabilitation can greatly improve their lives. Contention 3, life-saving drugs. Increased spending on welfare has given patients access to more life-saving drugs. In September of last year, the State Medical Insurance Administration added 17 cancer-fighting drugs to the public medical insurance plan, reducing their cost to patients by an average of 56.7%. Giving poor people a higher chance to survive rarer and more costly diseases. In some diseases, like pulmonary hypertension, the patient might need injections twice per month, with each shot costing 10,000 yuan, pushing his family into the poverty trap. Some patients give up on treatments simply because of the huge economic burden that the treatment brings to them. Others opt for generic drugs from India, which are cheaper but harder to create. One of the most common drugs, Bosentan, costs nearly 4,000 yuan for a box of 56 tablets, or 71 yuan per tablet at the hospital, but its Indian version costs just 10 yuan per tablet, causing the poor to choose drugs that may be potentially harmful to them. And second, we tell you that the health insurance coverage is low. We tell you that even though in the status quo, 95% is covered by the current health insurance plan. We tell you that the reimbursement makes it so that the poor have no access to these plans. And for all of these reasons, strongly urging for a pro ballot. Thank you.
Okay. So crossfire? Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So time starts now. So how many people are pushed into poverty due to the fact that they have to pay for medical insurance?
Right, we tell you that. We tell you that 44% of these people are pushed into poverty, and we tell you that we help them by providing them. We provide them with life-saving drugs, and then we tell you that without our provision, these people will have to use generic drugs from India, and that.
So what year is this evidence from? What year is this 44% evidence from? May I ask?
What do you mean?
What year is this evidence from, according to your evidence?
We can tell you that later in my second speaker is going to tell you that later.
Okay, can I please have a quick follow-up, like a 15-second follow-up? So according to the evidence that says 44%, the evidence continues by saying how the 44% is only from 2015. However, right now in 2020, the evidence also says 98% of these people have their fees already covered and the cancer and the leukemia issues are already solved. So this only shows that there's no lack of spending anymore. Okay, yeah, you can have a question.
Right. So why is there not a lack of spending anymore? That's because we have increased in health insurance. That's exactly why we should still continue to increase the trend. So
Why
that
do we
can
need to
flow more
increase if
income.
there's already 98% of people that already have it?
Right,
Why do we
because
need to
we tell you
continue
that-
to
we tell you
increase?
exactly these 2% of these people are right now in poverty. We tell that these 2% of people account for 28 million people, and we're helping them. We're helping those people who are disabled, who are unable to actually get a job, unable to have the treatment. Now, can we ask you a question? Thank you.
Sure.
So you talked about deforestation. So how is deforestation related to alleviating poverty?
Okay, so what happens is on our side, when you there are a lot of areas right now in mountainous regions specifically, especially in the rural areas, that because there's not enough flat land to work on for farming or agriculture, instead they take in forestation as their second chance of income. So instead of becoming a farmer, they can become, for example, forest rangers or, for example, wood manufacturers. And we talk that through these jobs, we give 150 million people a way to actually solve poverty. We also tell you that if you're a forest ranger, you can get a 10,000 annual payment. So this only shows that once we're able to provide these people with these areas of greenery and forestry and grassland, these people can actually use and utilize these areas for their way of getting a job. So now moving on to our question.
So can we ask you a follow-up? So
Sure.
So what's the annual income for these forest rangers?
Yes, I just stated like 10 seconds ago that forest rangers are getting a 10,000 payment annually. So this is actually a very good amount for example, a low income job. So now looking over to our question for you. So when you say that you need to increase school enrollment for disabled people, how specifically are you doing that?
Right, so we're increasing teaching training so that these teachers can better adjust and help these disabled people to fit in mainstream schools. Now, and we also tell you that we already helped these poor people through our evidence.
Thank you. Can we please take running prep? Thank you. Okay, so is everyone ready? My time will start now. First of all, looking at their framework, their framework was about helping the most people per year. And however, judge noticed that DBAL wastes more than 89% of their money, and also pensions also waste more than 89% of their money, meaning that even if we go by their framework, we'll still provide we meet their framework later on in today's debate. However, we said we should also consider sustainability, because if the people are going to just fall back to poverty the second they move out, it's not effective. When I say contentious, first of all, they talk about education. First, we said if the goal is to keep the students in school, then infrastructure also serves the same purpose. They say that 40% of these kids are unable to go to high school. However, you say infrastructure solves by giving you more salaries. According to Channel 8, an average rural worker may remit more than 3,000 to 4,000 RMB annually. We notice that all of this money can go through the educational system and go to kids and help these kids actually attend school. Moreover, we also see that in our case, we said that more than 43.6% of increased enrollment rate is contributed because of remittance money. So the concept actually serves the same purpose on this education point. But second, we see that pro only solves education in the short term, but not in the long term. Realistic giving people money won't solve if these kids can't even pass the school entrance exam. We said currently we solve overcrowding. According to China Daily 16, a middle school in rural Henan have an average class size of more than 100 people. If there's so many kids a class per classroom size, there's no way these kids can gain high quality education. Thus, we solve this entire inequality issue by building more schools, and thus, according to Finaway, the odds of graduating after having attended small classes increased by over 80%. Thus, we increase the root cause and solve the quality of education. But second, we see that these kids are not dropping out because of high school, but because they have lacked school access. According to John 13, the closed schools were mainly located in small villages where inconvenient transportation had a large impact on elementary pupils. When they talk about elementary people, we see that the problem is there is lack of transportation, causing education to be inaccessible to these people. But then they talk about high school, but we said if these kids are dropping out of primary school, it really proves that the compulsory education system itself is not developed as well, because there is still corruption and lack of regulation.
while 9-year compulsory education itself is supposed to be free. Then move on to pensions. First of all, we said increased spending doesn't solve because the issue is about how the money is spent, not the lack of funding. According to Economics 12, the reason why only a quarter of migrant workers in cities were covered by pension was because the system failed to keep track of wages. Moreover, more than 89.2% of all pension funds end up disappearing. They were either diverted or corrupted. More spending only worsens this problem. We see that if we solve regulation and put the money where they're supposed to be, we can actually gain full coverage for pensions. But then they talk about how we should give money for state assets. Notice is that in 2018 alone, there were more than almost 250 million rural population, which are over 60 years old population, which are over 60 years old. Even if you give one person per rent, it is still not effective because you're spending a large amount of money and only gaining small benefits. We see the better solution is to actually increase the job wages when they're younger. We see that according to China's bulletin, how workers, in order for them to access pension benefits in retirement, they need to contribute up to 8% of their income when they used to work. So if they gain more income when they were younger and earned more when they were young, they can in turn get better pensions. And that is the best solution for this because it's the most effective for each person individually targeted. Then moving on to talk about how they can benefit the disabled. First of all, we see the infrastructure is better. We tell that currently less than 7.7 schools have the accommodation needed for these schools in order for them to actually gain these disability students. So what we should solve is actually to improve the school infrastructure so that the school has the money and the school has the facilities in order for them to support these disabled people. Then finally, they talk about health insurance. First of all, they talk about this 44%. We see that welfare is already sufficient. Wall says that back in 2015, 44% of the rural population in China were impoverished. But in 2020, currently right now, 15 million poor people, or 98% of the poor population with infectious and chronic illnesses were already treated and taken care of. Meaning that right now, healthcare is not the root issue, and it's already solved. So there's no need for lack of funding. And also our opponents can give us current evidence it doesn't stand. But second, we tell that according to Collective 18, there's less than 1.27 beds available for every 1,000 citizens. Even if you give the coverage without hospitals, these medicines wouldn't be available. Thus, we only get.
Okay. So is everyone ready? Right. So my time starts now. So first look at our framework. We tell you that most measuring like the people per yen span is actually the most effective way to actually measure the effectiveness. However, we also agree with the sustainability point, as we will mention later. So now moving on to their first contention to talk about transportation. And however, e-commerce first. Increase in e-commerce infrastructure spending, we tell that it is very wasteful because by 2016, China had 1,100 e-commerce centers, and 300 of them were found at the county level, according to MOC. However, the vacancy rate hits 40% in some regions due to the mismanagement. Therefore, we need to promote the efficiency instead of increasing spending. Subpoint 2, they talk about TVE and businesses. That they then claim that like the local businesses will be benefited. 3 responses. First, local businesses are not benefited. Noodle shops are replaced by the McDonald's and Starbucks. At the end of the day, locals will still need the welfare and pension since the job offered are all low wage and cannot sustain their lives. And second, even if they prove that it benefits, it doesn't mean that we have to increase spending. We tell you that the current spending on infrastructure is already enough and that China always spend more on infrastructure than North America and Western Europe combined. Third, the topic is about the most extreme poverty, and local businesses is for people developed enough to have a business. Therefore, job training is more beneficial to the extremely poor, cross-applying to our point. And cross-applying to our contention to raising and also, we tell you that, especially to TVE, we tell you that the distortion of factor of production and economic restructuring towards the capitalization are the main reasons for the decline in employment elasticity in non-agricultural sectors, which not only limits the full utilization of China's abundant labor resources, but also hinders the rural laborers from taking advantage of the opportunities of rapid economic growth to improve their quality of life. And subpoint 3, to talk about remittances, we tell you that it doesn't alleviate poverty as our opponent chooses. The incidence of the poverty amongst the immigrants is around 50% higher than amongst the locals, according to ILO.org. Why? Because local hukou policy only allows the urban residents to enjoy their welfare. The immigrants can only temporarily reside in the city. Thus, welfare is the key to solve the problem, not moving people from one place to another. And then for their second contention, they talk about the forestry. We tell that our opponents contradict themselves actually, because according to NASA Earth Observatory Department, direct causes of deforestation are public infrastructure. Thus, the consequences of deforestation caused by the public infrastructure is way bigger than the benefit of forestry. We tell you that there is a lack of link. Our opponents tell you that planting trees and encourage forestation could actually help the environment, but never tell us how it could actually alleviate people from poverty. And even if they tell us that it actually boosted employment, it still needs job training for people to become the forest rangers. We tell you that and don't, because in best cases, it only prevents the poor stuck in deeper poverty. Even if you don't buy this, we tell you that the risk of the sandstorm is already very low, thus impact of forestry is even lower. Now responding to their contention 3, which is about education, our opponent said that increasing spending on schools actually alleviates poverty. Multiple responses. First, increased spending only leads to the wasteful vanity projects, and welfare is the key to accessing infrastructure. It must be prioritized, or infrastructure will not help the poorest of poor. And second, welfare is more effective. Statistics show that the students of regular high-paid teachers outperform their contacts, and lower-paid counterparts in Chinese language scores, academic aspirations, and diligence in computer homework. Therefore, we need to increase the spending on welfare and pay the teachers in order to increase the performance and educational quality. Just by making pretty dorms doesn't mean anything. For above reasons, we definitely negate. Thank you.
So crossfire?
Yeah.
Okay. So my first question is immigrants the same as migrants?
So what do you mean? Are you saying that?
Okay, what I mean is in your rebuttal, you said that immigrant workers have a higher chance of suffering from poverty, right? So are immigrant workers the same as migrant workers?
You still didn't explain your question. I'm asking, like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, my question was because in your rebuttal, you said that migrant workers are very likely to suffer from poverty, right? But we're talking about, you're talking about immigrant workers, we're talking about migrant workers. So my question is, are immigrant workers and migrant workers the
It's
same?
discriminatory towards them, right?
It's not discriminatory because, okay, I'll answer. What I'm saying here is that migrant workers is within the borders of the same countries, while immigrants is moving to a new country. So it's different, and you cannot use immigrant evidence against migrant evidence, right? You can have a question if you want.
Okay. So why do we actually need to increase transportation? Are there a lack of roads or something that makes
Yeah,
us?
so first of all, we tell that according to IISA, it tells you that currently TVs are restricted by deficient rural infrastructure and poor transportation. The reason for this is that resources cannot flow out, production access cannot go out, and they cannot sell their products outside. Thus, TVs are restricted. How we solve this problem is by increasing infrastructure, and we tell that according to Tom, after increasing transportation, after increasing more infrastructure, TVs increased by 10.8 million in 5 years. So we solve this entire problem, and if we build more bridges and build more transportation, TVs can go by their full extent. Okay, moving on to my question. So you talk about hiring teachers. Why are hiring teachers welfare?
Okay, so we tell you that the reason of there are not enough schools or like schools shutting down is because there isn't enough students. And the reason why there isn't enough students is because they do not have enough welfare and they feel that they're a burden to their family. Right? So if we increase the welfare, there's more schools and it will attract more
But
teachers.
I'm asking about teachers, right? You said you solved the problem by hiring more teachers so that you increase the quality of education. But what does hiring teachers have to do with welfare?
Because more students coming into the school will actually
I'm
help.
asking for the mechanism why specifically giving teachers money is welfare, because welfare is giving the money to people in need. How is giving teachers salaries welfare?
Okay, so you misunderstand our point. We are saying that we are using welfare to help the education of the students, right? And
I understand, but your mechanism here is hiring teachers, right?
Teachers are not in the schools right now is because of not enough students there.
Right, I understand, but I'm not asking about these students. I'm not asking about welfare towards the students. You continuously mention, you continuously mention about you're going to hire more teachers by giving teachers more pay. The mechanism I am asking for is that why is giving teachers
we're
pay?
going to give them more pay, but we say that it'll attract more teachers to actually help the students in the areas.
But how do you? Okay, yeah.
Sure. So how many people are actually employed through the forestry you mentioned?
More than 10 million. Right?
Can we please run our prep time? Thank you. Okay. So, is anyone not ready? Okay. Time starts now. First of all, looking at the main clash point here, which is on education, our opponents responded to by stating how welfare is more important here. However, we tell you that instead of giving money to families to hope that they don't drop out, what would we tell you that they still will, because welfare is only a form of deval where it only gives you a basis of survival. That doesn't stop them from dropping out of school to help their families work. We tell you instead we should give their parents a direct way of getting a job. So thus, we tell you that first of all, we have two mechanisms here. First of all, we tell them that we should help these students pass their exams, because no matter how much money or tuition you give these people to go to high school, it does not matter if they can't pass their high school exams. And we tell you that the only way that you pass the high school exams is to improve the quality of education in primary and secondary school. And how do we do that? We tell you that we have to attract teachers, and we do this in two ways. First of all, we have to increase the facility environment and the teaching environment so that teachers will actually come over. We also tell you that second of all, these teachers have to be satisfied with their payment, and we tell you that payment is involved in employment infrastructure, not welfare programs. So thus, when our opponent stated that a teacher payment is part of welfare programs during the rebuttal, this complete point does not even stand, and it completely supports the infrastructure point. We tell you that education is extremely important here, because we tell you that for every single year of education that you are provided with, 10% income is provided with you for the future. So we tell you that we actually fulfill sustainability, because we tell you in the future they're able to get a job. So thus, now moving on to the second clash point here, which is on employment. Our opponents respond to our argument by saying how, first of all, against TBEs, they say that it's not the poor people getting the job. However, we tell you that in these rural areas, these people are getting 12,000 RMB more than a normal farmer's annual income. They also say how TVEs are lacking. However, we tell you that we give you evidence that the reason why TVEs aren't fully developed right now is because of the lack of transportation. If there's no one able to move to these rural areas to build these businesses, then there's no way that we can have these businesses in the first place. Our opponents also responded by against remittances by saying how our opponents evident how there's going to be how people who are immigrants suffer more. However, we tell you that our opponents are talking about immigrants, and immigrants are people who move from different countries. We tell you that we're talking about migrants here, which are about people that are still in the boundaries of China. So that's the evidence our opponents bring completely drops. When our opponents say that we should be providing job training, they don't show the lack of job training. Instead, we directly tell you that there's a lack of jobs. So that's what providing these people with the jobs for example, forestry. We tell you that 150 million jobs can be provided, and for example, 500,000 from the project called TSFP, which is provided through these forestries and through these greeneries. Now, moving on to the small clash points here, which is on, first of all, healthcare. We already tell you that this entire contention drops because the evidence that they show us of the 44% already says that in today's world, 2020, there's already 98% of these people that already have these chronic illnesses covered. So that's this problem doesn't even exist anymore. Second of all, we tell you that when our opponents talk about the vulnerable people, 89% of pensions are wasted through corruption, and we tell you that only 7.7% of schools have accommodations for disabled people. So thus, we stand on the con side. Thank you.
Call for running prep time. Thank you. Thanks. Right. So if everyone's ready, our summary speech time starts now. First, about the framework. So we believe that in this debate, the both teams have agreed that we're judging this debate on the effectiveness of both short-term and long-term problems. As we have already stated, in our case, we're talking about short-term, whereas our opponents are talking about long-term and sustainability. Now, moving on to the main clashes in today's debate. The first main clash is education. So what did our opponents tell you? So our opponents are saying that they're solving it by creating more schools, and they're solving the root cause of it. However, we're telling you that they're not solving the root cause of it, because we tell you that for already 40% of these people drop out because of the lack of money because the lack of money they have because of the lack of funding. Therefore, we tell you that the main problem here is about the lack of funding. Therefore, we are directly solving the solution and giving these poor people the ability to go to schools. Now, moving on to their second clash, the second clash in today's debate, vulnerable groups. So our opponents are basically saying that the money spent is already enough, and that there might be mistargeting inside this issue. However, we tell you that these vulnerable groups are the most important people that our debate is targeting at. We tell you that these people, they don't have the ability to work. We tell you that these people with disability, we're helping them by having teacher trainings so that it can be more that mainstream schools can be more targeted to these people. We're solving the problem of the elderly by increasing the money spent in pensions. We're helping these people who are unable to work, and that while they are never targeting these people, we're specifically targeting to the most vulnerable. Therefore, we win on this clash. Now, the last clash in this debate about healthcare. So our opponent's only response to that is that the healthcare coverage is enough. They say that our evidence is outdated. However, we tell you that in the health status of the rural poor in China is not optimistic, and we tell that 51.63% attributing the poverty to illnesses of household members in 2020. We tell that over 60% of all households have at least one patient, and more than a quarter of the households with patient cannot afford expensive medical expenses. And we tell you that although 98% of all households participate in China's rural health insurance plan, the new rural cooperative medical scheme inside, 16% are still unable to bear their medical expenses after reimbursement from the scheme. Further, we tell you that high altitude, ill health, and low income are interlinked and mutually reinforcing. Therefore, we tell you that we win this clash, since we tell you that through our evidence, we tell you that it's not outdated, and that we show you directly that even though there are coverage, these poor people are not getting the money. Now, moving on to the last clash of today's debate, jobs. So our opponents are telling you that they are creating jobs through forestation and transportation. However, we tell you that this is not the case in today's debate. We tell you that we are the ones who are providing them job trainings. We're providing these teachers teacher training so that they can better suit for those disabled children. We're providing these people job training so that they can actually work in these highly skilled jobs, such as transportation. We tell you that, in fact, only 0.8% of these jobs are targeted to low-skill employees, and therefore we are the ones who are solving this problem. For all of these reasons, strong urging for pro ballot. Thank you.
Okay. So Grand Crossfire? Okay.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so our first question is, you continuously talk about job training. So how effective is job training?
Right, so we're saying that because high-skilled jobs is needed for jobs like infrastructure, therefore we need to increase the amount of job training so that these poor people can actually get these jobs.
But how effective is it?
We're asking, for example, is there an employment rate? How effective is it? Because we can tell you that according to Financial Times, only a small fraction of students said they actually found jobs after the job training. So it's not effective. So what we're asking is, how effective is it?
However, we tell you that, okay, from the same source, we tell you that these people, like at least some of them, receive jobs afterwards, whereas in infrastructure, you have no specific evidence showing how much of it is targeted to the people who are poor.
Okay, however, on our opponent's side, they say how some people are provided, but if we're going to compare efficiency, isn't it better to, for example, provide 150 million jobs through forestry, since we already tell you that these jobs are already provided?
So can we ask you, follow up, so how many people in those forestry works are actually poor?
We tell you that all of them are in these rural areas.
Right. In rural areas is not equivalent to poor, right, Judge? So
Yes, we understand that. However, we tell you that the evidence literally says that 150 million villagers were pulled out of poverty through improved farming and other job opportunities, such as forest rangers or wood infrastructure.
When it says pulled out of poverty, it means that they used to be in poverty, but now they're not in poverty anymore because we pulled them out of poverty.
You can have a
Because
question.
of
Right,
more
now we
credit.
covered in this scenario, all of these people you're talking about, they're not disabled. They're not old. They're people who has the
We're not
benefit
just talking about disabled, right?
in our scenario, we tell you that there's 83 million people in China right now who are disabled. And
Yeah, but
we
how
are-
many of them do you save on your side? You still haven't given us a number though,
We
right?
understand how many disabled people are there, but we want to know how many of them actually found a stable job after your training program.
According to CGTN, a total of 11.26 million poor labor force have been assisted to secure a job because of like the welfare program there.
Okay, that's all we asked for. You can have your
We move on
question.
to our question.
Mhm.
So, so how do people actually access to education if there isn't like welfare for them to actually access to like those schools you mentioned?
Okay, first of all, we tell you that even in secondary school, which is already covered by 9-year free compulsory education, 63% of them still don't go to school. This shows that even if they have all tuition free, it doesn't matter because they still don't go to school. We also tell you that, second of all, no matter how much tuition you give them, and even if they had enough money to go to high school, it's still not efficient because we tell you that the only way to get into high school is to pass the entrance exams. And we tell you that the way to pass these entrance exams is not by giving them money, but actually increasing the quality of education in primary and secondary school, which is only done by teaching salaries.
Make the
we are
quality of
at
education better.
so we are providing teacher training resources that actually make them better teachers.
Can we please run all of the remaining prep time? Thank you. Okay, so is anyone not ready? Great. My time will start now. Couple of reasons why you should definitely write a con ballot on your phone right now. First of all, we talk about the rural economy. We see that when we improve the rural economy as a whole, these people are going to be able to access both healthcare, education, and other issues our opponents mentioned on their side. Currently, first of all, we prove to you the lack of funding right now in the infrastructure system. We said according to ISA, TVs are restricted by deficient rural infrastructure currently right now. However, after increasing infrastructure, for example, in certain areas, Tom tells you the number of TVs increased by 10.8 million in just 5 years. All of these jobs are actually going to the poor villagers because they're village enterprises. And moreover, we tell that the average annual income for TV workers is 12,000 RMB, more than the farmer's annual income. We see that we're able to give the jobs to the poorest people, while job training, they never prove to you the efficiency of job training. They themselves admitted in the crossfire that they're only benefiting a small amount, and they never told you why there's a lack of funding for the disabled job training. We tell that currently the problem is that less than 7% of schools have funding for facilities for the disabled people. So the problem still is with the lack of funding with infrastructure, and by increasing infrastructure, we solve most problems. But the second way we increase the rural economy is by forestation. We tell that according to Xinhua News, every 4 million hectares become protected, 120 billion RMB could be generated, pulling 115 million villages out of poverty. We tell that currently it is not implemented right now because there's a lack of funding. However, with more funding, we're able to solve this and solve the entire bad economy caused by the geographical restrictions. Therefore, we're leaving all of these villagers and the entire rural area out of poverty. But the second reason we win is under our opponent's framework about efficiency. First of all, we showed you how, according to the World Bank, more than 90% of all DBAL spending is wasted, even under their framework. And we'll also tell you, according to Economist 12, more than 89.2% of all pension funds end up disappearing, while our opponents never proved about any corruption on our side. We said that all our money on our side are going to the actual poor people, and we tell you that actually after these remittances earned by the people themselves, they increase the likelihood of rural children being enrolled by schools by 43.26%. So therefore, we win on both sides and under both frameworks, and we're so proud to negate. Thank you.
Okay, can we take rest of our prep time? Thank you.
a result.
Okay. So is everyone ready? Right. So my time starts. Wait a second. So my time starts now. So let's look at some voting issues today, Judge. Voting issue 1, education. In their world, students cannot even reach the school. Our opponents say that building schools, giving like teachers job and letting them pass the task will actually solve this problem. However, we tell you that first, pretty school doesn't equal to better test scores, and pretty school doesn't equal to students getting education and alleviated out of poverty. We see the reason why the schools are shutting down is because building up pretty schools doesn't A, attract the teachers, B, the students still do not come here because of their family burdens and the lack of access. However, we tell you that we give them access by giving them welfare. We tell you that even right now, 40% of the rural students can't attend high school because of the cost. And we tell that every 10,000 RMB investment on the education can actually lift 7 individuals out of poverty. Thus, we went on this point. And voting issue 2 about the vulnerable groups. In our speech, they give no direct impact about how poor people, disabled people are being helped. However, we tell that it's a large part in the poverty population. And we tell that it's very important. And we tell that by giving those people pension, by giving those people vocational training, by helping those people with disability, we can actually achieve them better education, better jobs, and we can transfer the welfare to them. And specifically about the pension, 10% of the state fundings will be transferred to the pension fund, which could cover any pension shortfall among the elderly in the future. Voting issue 3 about healthcare. Our say that there's little bets. However, how that we provide you the welfare that actually gives them the access to the hospitals. People right now do not even have the access. Thus, we should give them more welfare. And we tell you that we actually reduces the drug prices through the welfare program and through the insurance program. And this is the key at actually decreasing the cost for them. And at last, about employment. For above reasons, we should definitely win. Thank you.
I think the results are out. Should we disclose it? Oh,
Wait, did I mute? Oh, damn. Sorry. It's like a split decision goes to the Kansai, the Shanghai Waikipao LT. Why I voted for the Kansai is because the Kansai convinced me in saying that it is a problem of this system that some of the workers they are not registered in the pension system, so that the money cannot be given to them. Once this problem is solved, then the pension is definitely enough for them to live a fair and enough life. And also, the Kansai convinced me in saying that we need to have like infrastructure for the teachers and also for hospitals so that the teachers are willing to teach students and then they can receive like education from primary school to middle school and then to further education. And the pro side didn't really convince me about why these families would definitely sending their children to school once they have like enough money, enough welfare. Because currently some of these families they have this welfare, but they are still not sending their children to school. So that is a point that I'm not really convinced by then, and that is why I voted for the Kansai. Since I wasted a lot of time, I just hand my microphone to the other judges.
Oh, I can go next. I also voted for Khan mainly because Khan did a better job pointing out a larger scope. So I think Pro said they agree we should focus on both short term and long term, but most of the time Pro is too limited to the short term impact of directly giving these poor people money. And at the same time, Pro is also very much focused on helping the most vulnerable group, which are the elderly and the disabled who are not able to work. But Pro should also aim to explain why focusing on the most vulnerable groups is more important than focusing on all poor people as a whole. So then I feel like Khan did a better job discussing how like building these infrastructure and providing like empowering these poor people or people in rural area to work and to make money for themselves is more sustainable in the long term because you're continuously generating income for yourself instead of like just receiving money from the government. I think Pro had a strong point about job training, which is actually which provides benefits to all poor people and not just the most vulnerable group. But Pro is too restricted in your reasoning about why we should vote for you. If you can expand on that point and spend more time telling the judges how you're not only focusing on the most vulnerable group, but you're actually like addressing the poverty problem as a whole. I might have voted for Pro, but yeah, I think overall Khan did a better job pointing out how there is sufficient funding for job training and pensions and education, but the more important thing is we should build infrastructure because there's currently, like you cited some statistical evidence saying like how currently there's like a funding and that's why there's a greater demand on this side. Yeah, that's
I can go
basically it.
next. I
Okay.
voted for the. Oh, you can go first. Sorry.
Okay. Well, it is a very close debate. It's good arguments from both sides. All of your framework and your major points were clearly established with good points, with good references as well. For me, the main swing factor for the pro side was getting to kind of pseudo let you agree to the fact that the status quo is enough during the rebuttal stage, and both at the crossfires as well. And then he getting to let you know that the status quo is enough, and you get to pseudo agree to it, and you are not able to re-establish your point to show projection as in the real impact it will have on poverty alleviation. And they also give you the alternatives why now that your status quo is enough in terms of access to both internet and everything, the alternative they give is not to focus more on welfare. I think for me that was the main deciding factor for me. Aside that, you all did a good job.
I voted for the pro side as well. I think this is a really close debate. Like, there are many reasons why I could vote either side. The main RFD for me is, I think first of all, the pro side did a really good job in challenging like why we need extra investment in infrastructure, given that we already invest in a status quo. And the second is just, I think, in the summary, I think the pro side made this really effective response that we have to prioritize social welfare in order for us to access the benefits of infrastructure. So these are the main reasons why I think the pro side won. But overall, I think all of you guys did a really good job. It was really close.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all the
Thank you,
judges.
judges.
you.
Thank you. Have a nice
Bye.